Hi, everyone. Hi, David. Hi, Josh. How y'all doing?
Very good.
Outstanding.
All right. So today we're going to do a recap for our Shadow of the Dragon Queen Dragonlance adventure we did. Kind of go through all the different chapters, reminisce about how it went, get input from what you guys thought about playing it, and if anyone has any questions online, we'll ask those. So let's get started. So the adventure starts out with the characters in the northern reaches of the Solamnic countries heading towards a village called Vogler. And that came about from a letter they got. They're connected by all knowing an individual named Espen. And Espen, what was it, Green Shield? Here, let me share this.
Yeah, Green Shield.
Yeah. So we start out there, Espen Green Shield. And so everyone makes up a reason why they knew Espen. And then they get a letter. And the letter comes from Becklin, who is a Solamnic knight at the village of Vogler, where they're gonna have Ispen's funeral. That's where the campaign starts. And if you're running this campaign, it's worth digging into. There's a D&D Beyond video. Let's see if I can find this one. Yeah. So here's this D&D Beyond video where they read the letter. So you can definitely grab that. Let me see if it'll play here.
Dear friend, I am Becklin Uthviharan. I've heard much about you from our mutual friend, Ispen Greenshield. It grieves me to share the news that our dear friend Ispen passed away peacefully here at his home in Vogler. May fortune and the old gods protect his soul. Ispen's friends are holding a memorial for him in the manner he always wanted.
So that was the launch into the adventure. And then the first part of the adventure felt very reminiscent, like the first couple of encounters felt very reminiscent of the first Dragonlance adventure from like 84, 85, DL1, where the party's going amongst the different roads between the different villages near Solace and the end of the last home. And what's that city to the west of Solace? I forget the name of it. Anyway, New Haven, I think it's New Haven. And they run across Draconians, and this picture here really gave me that same feel. And I made that the very first encounter of the campaign. So what did you guys think of the start and how it started out?
I noted from reading the adventure, or at least paging through it, is there are 3 recommended encounters for the beginning. And I did like how the encounters that I played through really set the tone of Dragonlance. So it felt different from the Forgotten Realms. One of the things that I guess you hear voiced about Dragonlance and to some extent Greyhawk is that they're the settings that feel a lot like the other fantasy settings and a lot like the Forgotten Realms. But playing this adventure and not having a lot of experience with Dragonlance, I didn't get that sense. It really seemed to carve out its own feel, and I felt that way right from the beginning. But I want to ask you, Tom, there were 3 adventures or scenarios from the start. Did you run all 3 of those for all of us?
I did. Yeah, all 3 of you played all 3 of the scenarios at the start. So there was the road encounter, and then you had the encounter at the little shrine, and you had the encounter of the Eye of, I forget what it was called, Eye of something.
It was the one that Mooncatch got to start with his journey towards being a red robe mage.
Right, so here it is, Eye in the Sky. So yeah, in order to make like the first session take up a whole session, I ran all 3 of them.
And that worked fine.
Yeah.
I didn't have any issues with that. I liked the introduction to the characters and the flavor, with each one of them seeming to spotlight different characters in the party. Mm-hmm. Josh, you're the big Dragonlance fan, I believe. Is that true?
Well, so Dragonlance was the first. Oh, sorry, I've got a guest. The Dragonlance was the first Dungeons and Dragons novels I read as a kid. That's what introduced me to Dungeons and Dragons. Sorry.
Yay,
I,
indeed.
yeah, I remember, like, it's one of those, you know, moments that just still sticks out with me as a kid. Going to a bookstore, it was the name of the bookstore, and going back to the fantasy section. This was back in, you know, the day when my parents thought it, you know, was no problem at all just to leave a sixth grader at a bookstore in Wichita while they went and did all of their stuff. And so I would sit in there for hours and just look at the different paperbacks. And I remember seeing the Dragonlance, the very first of the War of the Lance trilogy, and it had the kind of introduction to the characters at the very beginning, and just reading that, I mean, I was immediately hooked. And so I started reading Dragonlance in the sixth grade. And I quickly moved on to the Forgotten Realms, and frankly, you know, that the Forgotten Realms are the ones that I collected. I own all the novels, but Dragonlance was the first. And so being able to kind of go back to this, and my son is now, my oldest is now in sixth grade, and I have got him started reading the Dragonlance book. So this adventure, just the flavor of it, and the fact that it paralleled, if you will, the novels instead of just rehashing the novels. That's probably one of the things I love the most about it.
Let me ask you this. In the beginning, at least my character started as a cleric and got his powers fairly early. Where do you fall in the continuum between the gods are still supposed to be gone and, well, this is fine? It's
I think there probably was a bit of hand waving there, if I remember right, because if I remember, this adventure takes place before, early on in the War of the Lance, so probably before the companions meet at the last home in Solace and Gold Moon, and
I can fill that in. So yeah,
okay.
It is before the half a year before the books start. So it's the year 351 in the spring when this adventure starts. So they did have to introduce, in order to have clerics in the system, the gods earlier than they were introduced in the books. I could see they were trying as hard as they could to stay with the books, and they did a really good job of it. They had to introduce the clerics early. They kept the dragons out. They kept the good dragons out, and I resisted that too. I wanted to bring in the good dragons. I had a mini going, ready for a dragon. Josh, could you just put on mute while you're not talking?
Oh, I apologize.
No problem. So I had this dragon. Let me find it here. Go to the last tab. The last part of the adventure. So the last part of the adventure, the party is fighting. They get to fight with their Dragonlances. They get to fight aerial battles, but they do it on Dragonels instead of full dragons. I had this this dragon ready to go, this bronze dragon, because the party actually meets a bronze dragon in the adventure, but the bronze dragon never reveals themselves as being a dragon. And so I definitely wanted to have that come in, but I resisted. The party didn't get to ride on a good dragon. That's the one thing probably that I missed out a little bit about from the Dragonlance books, but everything else felt very Dragonlance, and it was very good that it paralleled Dragonlance, like you're saying. So the party got to do their own characters, got to do their own story, weren't rehashing something maybe everyone already knew, and that made it new for all the players, I think. So I'm glad that you like that, Josh. I know old school me, who played those adventures back in 84, 85, wanted to play those adventures again, and DL1 is fantastic. The setting of it, you know, Tracy Hickman with his various different adventures he's done, Ravenloft and Dragonlance and stuff, he comes up with some of the most fantastic adventure settings, and DL1's definitely that. You know, you have this lost city that's sunken down into the mire, but they did some things in this one that kind of replicated a lot of the feels of those first four adventures, so I liked how they did that. Let's see, we talked about the intro. Let's talk about some of the stuff that's available as resources. So if you're getting ready to run this adventure, this is Dungeon Masters Guild, and I'm on the Dragonlance setting page, and here's the hottest Dragonlance stuff. And the one I didn't use the first two, but if you're definitely wanting to dig in more, these first two I'm sure are very good. I did get to use the Test of High Sorcery, and here's that product. So we had a wizard, and so they had to go through the Test of High Sorcery. What do you think of that one, Josh?
I actually really liked it.
Yeah.
It was a lot of fun, and I loved the connection that with the Gold Dragon, who then became Soth's Death Dragon mount later. Was that in the published?
No, it just kind of fell into place because, you ran into the Gold Dragon, and Karavarik's Soth's mount was a former Gold Dragon. I said, that's perfect. I can use that and make that so that there's a chance. Because the final encounter with the Death Dragon, Karavarik's, Soth's not riding it, so it kind of feels a little out of place. And it was perfect, and there's a lot of stuff happening at the end. You're fighting Soth, you're fighting Soth's lieutenant, you're bringing down the Flying Citadel, then you're fighting one of the Dragon High Masters, and you're fighting a Greater Death Dragon. So it's like, okay, can I get the Greater Death Dragon if the party has the resources to just negotiate that away? And it was perfect the way it worked out from the Test High Sorcery. And there's lots of little stuff in that Test High Sorcery that other parties could use, I think. You just pick out something that resonated and use it for the rest of the campaign. So that's definitely a recommended product to get. Then another huge product to get is Tessa's maps. 94 maps for Dragonlance, Shadow of the Dragon Queen. We use a lot of these, and they are like $10 for all the maps. If I look down on this page here,
I will be right back. Sorry, okay. I got to take care of something real fast.
Just look at how many maps there are there.
For $10, that's an absurd value. You almost feel like you're taking advantage of poor Tessa at that price.
Yeah, Tessa, you could do 20, I think. No,
for sure.
You could do 30. I'd buy it for 50. It's that good. So there are no maps for the first encounters, and Tessa did maps for the first encounters. The first 3 encounters are shown here in Preludes in Chapter 3. And then Tessa filled in many maps that don't exist in the adventure, and stayed away from the maps that do exist. Tessa didn't repeat any of the maps that are already in the adventure, so you're not paying for something twice at all. So that is highly useful. And let's take a look at chapter. So we looked at Preludes. Let's look at after Preludes, and you find these 3 encounters, you get into Vogler itself. That starts out Chapter 3. And Vogler is a village, and there's a map providing the adventure of the village of Vogler. Sitting in the northern reaches, right up here, just northwest of Kalaman. And there's a keep there with Becklin in it, a gnome flinger, which the party gets to use most likely in that part of the adventure to fling themselves behind enemy lines. And not only does Tessa have all these maps, but Tessa also has different versions of the maps. Oh, and this map is from Heroic Maps and filled in great for overlooking the dragon camp. So I'd suggest that for sure. So let me show you what you can do with Tessa's map. So here's a map of the town square. And later in the adventure, when the attack from the dragon army comes onto Vogler, the party's racing to get the villagers out of Vogler in time. The dragon army's setting the village on fire here and there. And you can just do... where you just, set the flames on Vogler, and you can start playing in that. The party tries to get all the villagers to the wharf so you can put the wharf on fire. Just fantastic stuff that Tessa's done there.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, so Chapter 3, the party comes into Vogler. They meet Becklin. They find out that there's an army north of town. They go spy it out. They find out it's a dragon army coming to attack Vogler. They really can't prevent it, so they try and get the people out of Vogler in time. And that's really what's happening in Chapter 3. So what do you think of that part of the adventure, David?
Well, I have opinions on 2 things. First of all, the whole thing starts with a festival again. And everybody who knows me knows that this is a little bit of a pet peeve. I think festivals are maybe a skosh overused and a skosh lazy as a way to start first level characters. And I say that recognizing that people are, people love them, designers love them, and people love them. So I guess I'm just going to yell at clouds here, but it might be time to try and stretch for something other than a festival to start your adventure.
Yeah.
The other thing is another interesting issue with the adventure, and I think the example of the evacuation is a really outstanding one that sort of shows it. What we've got here is a really ambitious adventure where you're supposed to be, as a party, caught up in this war, this conflict as the dragon army advances and also seeks their super weapon, their flying fortress. And the authors of the adventure are really looking for sort of an epic fantasy novel feel for the narrative as it goes by. But they've got the usual problem of players who are not necessarily going to cooperate with the plot that they're imagining. So there are times in this adventure as a player, and then I kind of see it paging through the adventure later as an observer, where the adventure clearly wants the players to take a particular course of action because that's the narrative that's planned in these 300 pages or 250 pages. But they also don't want the players to feel like this is railroad tracks and they're stuck on them. So they kind of try and hide over them. So as an example, we've got here with the evacuation, and the plot depends on the players opting to evacuate the city, or at least feeling like they've got a place in that decision to evacuate the city, because there's several pages detailing the evacuation of the city. But they also want to make it feel like this is an organic decision that the players had a hand in. So there's a point where, and I'd be interested in hearing how this went from you as the DM's perspective. But there was definitely a point as a player where I felt like, evacuation was the choice, and that's kind of what we had to opt for. And that's borne out by the text where it says, this character Willett, Darrett keeps showing up. No, wait a minute. Let me see my notes here. It has Darrett support and encourage the players to go ahead and go along with the evacuation. And I get the sense that there are other places in the adventure where it wants the players to come up with a decision, but it also only has one decision that they're really supported for in the adventure. So I sympathize with the pickle that the designers are in, and I'm not sure there's a better way to do it, but it is a tough predicament, and it's definitely one that kind of shows some seams in the adventure. How did you feel about that, Tom, as the one who's maybe nudging us as players to go for one particular course of action at numerous points in this adventure?
Yeah, it definitely had that. From most recollections I have, I didn't have to get very heavy-handed in it at all. It's like the path was so obvious. You all picked that path without provocation. I mean, from the Vogler village, what could you have done? You didn't know anything about the Northern Wastes, so you couldn't have really decided to go there. That's another option that they could put in the adventure, where they could drop some knowledge about the Northern Wastes, and you guys could say, no, we're not going to Calaman, we're going to go to the Northern Wastes instead. And give you at least two options that way. Let's see, other choice. So if you do evacuate, you end up in Calaman. Then you're in Calaman, and they give you the choice to basically join up with the army there and be scouts and do stuff around Calaman. And that gives you the opportunity to find out the extent of the dragon army incursion and how widespread it is and where it's happening. What other choice did you have when you got to Calaman instead of joining the army? Well, you didn't really know much. You could have gone back to Vogler, try to retake it. You didn't know much about the Northern Waste that time, but they could introduce that a little bit earlier. So yeah, if they had more page count and could flesh out some stuff, they could make it a little bit more freeform, where the parties got the choice. They could go to the Northern Waste, or they could go to Calaman, or they could do things in different orders. And a good adventure that's that way is Witchlight, right? Wild Beyond the Witchlight has 3 different realms the party goes to, and they go to them in a certain order. But with a little bit more page count, a little bit more thought, it could have just easily been the party can go to any realm in any order. And I think a DM, could come to this and think, well, my party's, I want to make sure they have multiple options. That's the kind of thing you could do. I think you could add those kind of options. You'd have to toy around with the challenge rating the monsters and stuff that you first encounter when you get to the places that are higher level. But I think it could be done. But the path was so obvious. I felt like you always made the decision yourselves in most cases, I thought.
Okay.
How about you, Josh? What do you think about that?
Oh, I agree. It was funny when I was talking to Shane at the end of the adventure. I think I can't remember if he was talking with all of us or what, but had made a comment about how it felt railroady at times. And I never felt that way, but I think that was because to me, the narrative path was just so obvious that that's what we would follow. It never occurred to me that I would, that we would be doing something different. So it never felt like it never to me felt like I was being railroaded in any specific direction, because that just was the way the story should be progressing. So, and I feel like, any published adventure that has a beginning, middle, and end is going to have that, problem of, it's not even the most sandbox of adventures. You look at what Tomb of Annihilation was really very open as far as where you went, but there were still moments where you had to be directed to go to the Lost City, right? So every published adventure is going to have that narrative structure, and even though this one did not have the huge open world, sandbox elements, Northern Wastes was a little bit, I think you could go wherever you wanted, so that was probably the most sandbox of any of it. But to me, it just felt like that was the way the story went.
Yeah. Okay, so then there's a little bit of foreshadowing there at the end of chapter 3 when one of the party members looks up, and it was Shane's character who's playing the Solamnic Knight, looks up and sees horsemen up on a hill. And it turns out these horsemen are Death Knights under Soth's command, observing the battle that's going on to take Vogler. And then you flee Vogler. You get everyone into the docks. They're all, heading down the Vingard River and on to Calaman. And that brings us into chapter 4. And chapter 4 gets you into Calaman. The party is basically with a whole bunch of refugees. All their boats come to the shore here. More maps by Tessa, just great. And then they go into Calaman, and they kind of enlist as being scouts for Calaman to find out the scope of the Dragon Army incursion. And there's a couple of locations on the outskirts that they have encounters, and the order there is not really that important. They can also explore Calaman, all these different locations within Calaman. And finally, after some time, they go to a battle, or what had happened was Lord Becaris and Becaris the Younger had led troops away from Calaman to go fight some Dragon Army troops. And Darret Highwater went with them, and Darret asked the party to come help, because Darret thought that the Becaris father and son would just lead him into destruction. And so, sure enough, when the party gets there, the army's being routed, and they rescue Darret and Becaris, and then finally they find out that Becaris the Younger had been lost in the fight. And Becaris the Younger is one of the NPCs in this adventure that is a huge name in the books. Becaris is actually a Dragon High Lord, or Dragon High Master, of the Blue Dragon Army under Kidiara in Dragons of Winter Night and Dragons of Spring Dawning. And Becaris is very villainous and does terrible things, including to Lorana, one of the main characters of the whole story. So I didn't know who that was, and the book didn't really the adventure didn't spell it out to me. So it was only by happenstance that I happened to be playing the war game. That's the whole campaign, and I noticed one of the generals was named Vicaris in that, and then I looked him up and said, "Oh, this is important that this person, survives this." And sure enough, he does survive because he's lost in this battle, reappears later in the adventure, and is being fought on the back of a not a dragon, but a dragonelle, and falls off into the crowd. So just like regular Dragonlance style, the villain, dies without the party finding the body.
That was a great banishment of the Dragonelle.
Yeah. So then that's the first half of chapter 4. The second half of chapter 4 is when the party comes back from this battle at Steel Springs where they rescue Darrett. They come back to find out that some knights had entered the city. And these knights are described as being, their weapons and armor is badly damaged, in terrible shape, and not anything like a Solamnic knight. Well, the party comes to the castle, trying to track down where these knights are, because the knights went to talk to the city council, and there's 2 death knights, or not death knights, but skeletal knights on guard outside of the city council, and they're riding skeletal horses. And then the party finishes them, goes into the council, and finds a massacre there where a knight called Caradoc has killed the whole city council and is waiting for the party to come through the doors and to kill the party. And Caradoc is actually just there holding the party up because Lord Soth has gone below, and you can actually see on this map by Tessa a purplish light on the stairs that go down. And so the party fights Caradoc. And Caradoc is a Solamnic knight, but he's possessed by the ghost of Caradoc. And so the knight goes down, then the ghost comes out, and the party fights the ghost. They saved the knight. They found out the knight had, last thing he remembers was riding through Nightland near Dargard Keep, where Soth is, and Caradoc had taken possession of him there. And then the party races below. Actually, Leon, I didn't talk about Ladara. So Ladara makes another appearance here. And Ladara first appears in chapter 3. And Ladara is one of the banshees that surround Soth at all times. She's one of the elvish vanguard of the elven priestess that Soth had married and forsaken his wife, and his wife mysteriously died shortly before he remarried this elven priestess. And Soth goes off to fight to prevent the cataclysm. He's given a mission by the gods to go help prevent the cataclysm. He is met there by Ladara and the rest of these maidens, and she tells him that his wife is cheating on him. He goes back in a rage and kills his wife, and therefore the cataclysm happens. And because he was like the last of 13 tests that all failed to stop it. And so Ladara is cursed with undead, Soth is cursed with undeath, and Ladara and the other elven maidens, the banshees, are always surrounding Soth and always trying to, prevent his goals. So, did any of you piece that together during the adventure?
That's a lot of lore, and I'm not that great at following all that.
It is some deep lore, yeah. So definitely.
I don't remember that in the moment that I made the connection between the Banshee and Ladara. I remembered the broad strokes of Soth and how he had started the cataclysm and all of that. But the finer details, I did not. Yep.
Yeah, so that was pretty cool having Ladara there the whole time trying to thwart Lord Soth's plans, and she pops up in the adventure several times, just trying to keep the Lord Soth from advancing his goals. And then the party goes down below in chapter 4 into the catacombs below the castle, and they see all these cataclysmic visions down here below, and there's a picture of one of them. There's Soth. I don't know if that's his wife that he's coming back to kill or who that is exactly in that picture. So the party goes through here, and they have all these cataclysmic visions, fight undead, get some treasure and stuff, and finally come to the cataclysmic flames that Soth had come to get. And Soth had left just before the party gets here, but left behind a Death Knight, or a Skeletal Knight, Sarlamir, who the party finds out Sarlamir had been involved in one of the tests to stop the cataclysm. Actually, he was there to stop like this battle between the good dragons and the Astarian king priest. And Sarlamir ended up killing the gold dragon Karavarix, who Mooncatch had seen in his Testify Sorcery in Karavarix's original gold dragon form. And let's see. So the Testify Sorcery took place in between these two chapters, between chapter 3 and chapter 4, because in chapter 4 the party can find Magify Sorcery, and that Magify Sorcery can send any other mages off to take the test, and that's what we did for the Testify Sorcery. And the party kills Sarlamir, finds out from Sarlamir and from this tomb that Sarlamir actually has a shard of a Dragonlance. He had a Dragonlance to go stop this fight that was happening, and ended up using it on the gold dragon Karavarix, and killed Karavarix, and then cursed everyone in this keep, and destroyed the Dragonlance, which he just had a shard left of. So that's where the party picks up the shard of the Dragonlance that they're going to try and go to the Northern Wastes to forge into a new Dragonlance. And they also find out that the city that the dragons were mad about, that the Astarians were flying, the reason the dragons were mad about it was because it was a dragon graveyard. And the Astarians were actually using the strength and the magic in the dragons to empower this city to fly, and that's why the good dragons were incensed, and so the city ended up crashing in the Northern Wastes, and the party's going to go up there to try and reforge the Dragonlance. So a lot of deep lore happening behind the scenes. How does the party know to go to the Northern Wastes? It's basically from researching the libraries of Calaman that they find tomes and references that can lead them that direction to find that there's a Temple of Paladine. They've also got scouts that are telling them that for some reason the Dragon Army is in strength in the Northern Wastes, don't know for sure what they're doing, and the party decides to set out in an expedition to find out what's going on up there. So that was chapter 4. So what do you guys think of chapter 4?
I liked it a lot. I mean, I think Lord Soth's one of the greatest villains ever. So it's always fun to, have him involved.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, obviously I knew going into it because of the reveal of the miniatures that he was in this adventure, but it still was I still thought it was pretty cool the way they did it.
Yeah. David?
Yeah, I agreed. I'm not, again, particularly familiar with the lore, but I did get a feel for Lord Soth and his villainy, and it did set him up as an epic villain, even though I knew we weren't the ones who were going to be taking him down, or maybe he never gets taken down. I don't know. One of the things I'm curious about is by about this point, I was starting to struggle with the cast of characters and remembering who was what. Again, this is a part where I'm sympathetic from the designers, because I know they want the party to be hopping from location to location and making it feel like there's an epic feel to this whole thing with a cast of thousands. But when I do my own D&D stuff, I always try and stick with a small world principle, because I kind of suspect that a lot of players are like me, and they can't keep track of a lot of characters who walk on and off at different moments. And at this point, I was starting to struggle with the cast of thousands and remembering who was what. But maybe that's just me. Josh?
I usually have a little bit easier of a time, I think, keeping track of that. But there were still some characters that I kind of forgot. Wait, who was this? What was it? So I get that.
Yeah.
But to me, that's not necessarily a design flaw, because I I do I really do enjoy this idea of this really lived in world that we're in the middle of, that is populated by not just nameless, faceless characters. I always, whenever Tom introduces an NPC, I always want to know the NPC's name. I always want to
Yes.
know that there is a personality behind the NPC, not just a, random face to convey information and then disappear. So, I, to me, that was something I really liked, that by and large, they really populated this world, and I like that.
Absolutely. And to the adventure's credit, there were some NPCs who really stood out for me. And one of them was the recurring role of Darrett, who is going to have a place definitely in the next chapter. And then I think almost to the end.
Yeah, all the way to the end for Darrett. Okay, so the next chapter. So the next chapter we come to is chapter 5, and that's where the party goes off into the northern waste to find this lost city and find out what the dragon army is doing up here in the northern wastes. By the way, I'm using the new Roll20 menu bars and stuff. They're working pretty good, actually. So the northern wastes, if I look at a map here, it is pretty vast. Every one of these hexes, once this draws in, is 6 miles. And everywhere where I have a red arrow are sites that the party goes to. And actually there's several more that I didn't draw in. And really the order of all this is up to the party. There's nothing the party really has to necessarily have. They're asked by Dalamar, who is a character from the books that the party runs into there.
That one, Dalamar's inclusion felt like pure fan service.
Yeah. Yeah, that could be. So he's with a contingent of elves that are up here exploring, trying to find anything from the Lost City, any of the magic of the Lost City. And then one of the first things the party runs into when they land is a boat that's empty, of Sylvanesti elven origin. And when the party messes with it, air elementals are drawn out, and the party fights the air elementals, and Darlamir appears just behind the party. Dalamar, sorry. Dalamar appears just behind the party, and then the party, meets him. He takes them to the camp of the elves, and the elves are pretty xenophobic and don't want really anything to do with the party. But Darlamar wants the party to find this Astarian city, and he thinks he's on to where it's at. Now, obviously, the party could just track army patrols back to the city. So if the party wanted to just beeline to the city and find a patrol and track it back, they could find the city. But Dalamar suggests that the party goes to several places of power here in the Northern Wastes, and that will help him find where the city's at. And there's lots of random encounters in this area, and Tessa did maps for all of them. This is a really cool one. This is an Astarian shrine that the party can use to teleport. And if I recall correctly, did I have anything for this? I did not. There was a guard there that the party had to fight, and then earlier on I had given the party a magic item that was a lance that granted the user advantage to attack anything Astarian of origin, and that was used on this guard. They had the waterways here, so a big part of the setting is that these waterways are dry, but they fill up as the tides come and go and the moons of Kryn come and go. So all these little rivulet-looking things can fill up with water. And Tessa's maps, again, came in great for doing that. So here's an example of one of those locations. And I can start it out dry and then have the water start flooding in.
So cool.
Yeah. And then this is a camp of elves at one of the locations and a shrine. So this is the map that's in the adventure by Mike Schley, I believe. And then the shrine kind of nestles right into it, so you can get how the party approaches the underwater shrine that they investigate. Another place is an ancient fortress that the dragon armies are excavating. And Tessa, of course, did the maps approaching the ancient fortress, and then you come into the ancient fortress. And then another place is an ancient tower that actually has a connection to the outer planes, or another plane that the party can explore. All done. These maps are done by Tessa. These maps are in the adventure here. And so the party is exploring basically these northern wastes. This is half of the exploration. So I did like the southern part of the northern wastes with this. And then the northern part in the next set of maps here. And this one's got more of the channels. It's got the Blue Maw Cave, where the party can find an ancient blue dragon's treasure. And Heart's Hollow, where the party finds people who are surviving here in the northern wastes. And in Heart's Hollow is a brass dragon that's like protecting all these people. And this brass dragon wants the party, well, the party, when they come to a camp of the dragon army, they can find in the dragon army camp, in the commander's tent, a chest with a dragon egg in it. And if they take that back to back to Heart's Hollow, the brass dragon trades them dragon armor for that. And then
Just
finally,
it's a bronze dragon for what it's
bronze,
worth.
sorry, bronze dragon.
It's so good.
And then finally, the party, after all their explorations of the northern wastes, can find out where the city is and multiple ways into the city. So that went like 4 sessions of exploring all these locations, meeting all these people, the elves, the people at Heart's Hollow, fighting the dragon army, multiple dragon army patrols, coming to the cave that Darlamar was looking for, and in that cave was actually a remnant of a dragon orb. You guys found that, but you never found like a full dragon orb.
This is the part of the adventure that's the big sandbox that gives players a little bit more agency to wander around. And I think it was particularly successful in one way. It didn't fall to a pitfall that I've seen in past Wizards of the Adventures with their sandbox location. Is with the sandbox, you do want to give the players some agency to decide where they're going to go. But you also want to avoid having the players feel like they're directionless or goalless and sort of just plodding from square to square to see which comes next. So in this segment, what I really enjoyed about the sandbox, in addition to the actual locations and the discoveries, was that I never felt like we were without any direction. We had options about places to go, but we also had leads that suggested where we might want to go next or what we might find in different spots. So we could choose between these various leads as opposed to just choosing, well, let's go to the hex on the right. So kudos to the designers on this part.
Yeah. Anything else to add there, Josh?
No, I agree completely. I think that was the perfect balance of sandbox. I mean, that's exactly how it should be done. Explore however you want to, but have specific destinations to explore.
All right. So that was chapter 5, and then the party finds the lost city, and they come to chapter 6. And chapter 6 is kind of also sandboxy in that the party could go in over the cliff line, although that's highly discouraged because there's Dragonel patrols, so they'd probably most likely be seen. Or they have a secret way into the city through the Path of Memories. The Path of Memories gives them basically an NPC where they can learn some things about the City of Lost Names. And this NPC here was actually at the city, at this destruction of the city, is a mage of high sorcery, and named Demolin, and can share with the party a little bit of the layout of the city and what's going on in the city now. And then there's this nice picture of the whole city from the vantage point of coming out of Demlin's cave. And the party finds out that the Path of Memories comes out over here. The Dragon Army controls the city. They have their army headquarters at the occupied mansion. There is the Threshold of the Heavens here, which is where the chief worship happened in the city of the good deities. There's the Temple of Paladine, where the Dragonlance could be reforged in theory. And finally, there's the Bastion of Takesis. And when the party first comes out of the Path of Memories, they see circling around the Bastion of Takesis death dragons. They see Soth actually leave the Bastion. And they see plenty of patrols around the Threshold of the Heavens, some coming and going from the occupied mansion. And the adventure is written up so the party would take the path of occupied mansion, then temple, then Threshold of the Heavens, but I don't know of any party that would pick that path. You guys, of course, went straight to the temple, which I think is what everyone would do to get the Dragonlance reforged. So what do you guys think of the setup for the city?
Right. We had a goal, so
Yeah.
we chased that goal like every other party would. And
yeah, so I'd expect 90%, 95% of parties are going to go right to that temple. Now, you ended up visiting, well, you went to the temple first. You got the Dragonlance, and then you went to the Bastion of Takesis. And the Bastion of Takesis is not something that you're supposed to get into in this part of the adventure. And they have the approach of the place. This is a map showing the approach of the place. Completely reinforced, and guards everywhere, and just, danger flashing signs all around it. So the party wisely chose not to go in there next. Instead,
which, let's be honest, that's always a coin flip as to whether the party will wisely choose not to assault the clearly impregnable fortress.
Right. So you ended up going to the army command post, and from the army command post, you found out that the main commanders are at the Temple of the Heavens, or the Threshold of the Heavens, which is over here. And as you go up into the Threshold of the Heavens, you end up fighting someone who had been mentioned in many of the times in Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, if you interrogate any guards, as a cleric of Takesis, who then, when you got there, turned out to be the Blue Dragon. And you fought this Blue Dragon, defeating it. I think I might have upped it all the way to an adult Blue Dragon. I might have kept it young. It starts out young, and I think I beefed it up quite a bit. Because by this time you guys had a Dragonlance, and you're doing pretty good for yourselves. So, anyway, as you start to fight that dragon, or as you finish it off, the Threshold of the Heavens lifts off of the ground and begins to fly. And so you guys are like getting out of the threshold and trying to get away from it. And that's where that chapter 6 ends. So what were your guys' thoughts on chapter 6? You had a hell of a battle here with the treants. I remember that.
Yeah, I didn't like that. I do remember that. Like, I'll be honest, I think the only thing I do like that really jumps out at me is how much I hated that battle.
Yeah.
Other than that, like I remember the chapter as a whole was fun. I just nothing really stuck out at me. Well, I'll tell you, actually, this stuck out at me. Not until after the adventure was over, but so I won't go too much in detail on this, but it really felt like, foreshadowing wise, it was laying that this chapter continued laying the groundwork that Soth is the big bad. He's going to be the one that is the ultimate villain that we fight. And so, and again, when we talk about the end of the adventure, I think that is somewhat misleading, but that was another thing that stuck out at me.
It's interesting. It's like, what is the ultimate villain of this adventure? It's like it's the Flying City itself, right? If you take down the Flying City, you've won. Even if you don't beat the High Master at the end. Or, I mean, you could fight Soth in theory, and maybe beat him in theory. He's pretty tough, but I mean, a party of 5 11th level characters can usually take on a really tough opponent when they're all by themselves. So if the final villain was Soth, I imagine it would have had to been Soth and the dragon at the same time. And I think at some point, probably in the writing of this adventure, that's what they had plans for. Because if we look at some of the art that I found, here, let me share this one. So I found this art online, and it's got Soth attacking the party on the dragon. It's got dragons battling. They obviously backed off on that. They said, no, good dragons haven't appeared yet in the storyline, so we won't do that part of it. But you don't have the battle with Soth and the dragon. Instead, you end up, and there's another picture here of Soth and the dragon fighting the party as kind of the last battle, but you have the flying city behind him still. So I saw these pictures of that. They got to fight Soth and the dragon at some point. So I added that to chapter 7 before you went up to the bastion. I had him just do one pass by the party, and I mean it was pretty vicious, right? It dropped Mooncatch
Yeah.
in one breath,
Yep.
and the rest of the party was nearly dead, and then he continued his path on up to the citadel.
Well, it wasn't just the art either. They made a miniature of Soth on Dragonthought.
Yeah.
But
Here's this one. So you can buy the Soth on the Dragon. Yeah, I bet they were writing the story originally and had, the final battle was with Soth. But in the end, the final battle was basically bringing down the Flying Citadel. And then there was a second kind of climax with the Red Dragon High Master, who had only been kind of spoken of a little bit in the adventure. And that was a really tough fight, mainly because I made the dragon adult instead of young. So it was a touch and go fight at the end.
well, it was a good fight. It just it felt like almost like a post-credit scene, if you will.
Yeah.
And so at the time, I just thought, okay, well, this is just to give you a little bit more combat. That's fine. But then when I went back, I started reading through the adventure afterwards, and the way that they describe it at the beginning of the adventure is that she is the big bad.
Yeah.
But I just don't think they really hammered that home as the adventure went. And I think that your theory that maybe that's because that was a change from what it was originally planned makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it felt that way.
It didn't feel like the climactic fight against the actual big bad that you could defeat in this adventure, because all the previews, all the hype was for Lord Soth throughout the adventure as your ultimate foe. And then there was a little bit of indirection, and you got to fight this other person instead.
Right. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, so let's get to the next chapter. And let's do a little segue in between chapters here. I want to just do a shout out for a YouTube channel. If you're going to run this adventure, check out this YouTube channel by Adam, Dragonlance Saga. So he's got all sorts of videos here on different aspects of lore, and highly worth it to go check that out if you're going to run the adventure. He's also running the adventure too. I think I'm not sure exactly how far into it they are, so you can check them out playing the adventure as well. So that's a really good resource. And then I showed those miniatures. Here's the miniature for Kinsaldi, the Red Dragon High Master, and that's basically the final battle. She appears just that one encounter in the adventure, and isn't anywhere near as foreshadowed as Soth is, right? You're seeing Soth all through the adventure. You hear about her if you interrogate some Dragon Army people, and then you have
Which you have to leave them alive to do that.
Which some parties don't do that. And then you got the Calaman Forces miniatures here. This miniature set, this is the Draconian miniature set. Definitely grab this one. They're really great looking miniatures. My only complaint is that there's only one Capac Draconian. There was 2 Bozaks, 2 Baz, 1 Auric, and 1 Sivak. So I'd get like 2 of these sets if I was running a campaign at home on the tabletop. Definitely a good set of adventures or miniatures. Okay, so back to the battle. So to get into the Dragonlance, you have to get by Duskwalker. Now, Duskwalker does have some ways that the party can get by him easier. Let me see here.
Which made it all the more vexing that we got punished by the creature.
Well, it was vexing because it was multiple attempts to persuade him, and yet the dice gods just like smoked.
Yeah.
Or Tom messed with the macro. It was one or the other.
One of the two.
Probably.
Yeah, you guys tried everything you could um, to get by him. Anyway, so you finally did get by him into the Temple of Paladine, got the Dragonlance reforged, and then went to the Bastion of Takesis. Didn't go in there. Instead, ended up at the Threshold of the Heavens, which then lifted off, and the Actually, I'm sorry. The Threshold of the Heavens doesn't lift off. It's the Bastion of Takesis, which is lifting off. And the whole city's shaking. There's this huge earthquake. The Bastion's lifting off. You guys are getting out of the Threshold of the Heavens, which is up in the air, but not climbing up like the Bastion of Takesis is. So they couldn't raise the whole city. You thwarted that in the Threshold of the Heavens. What they were attempting to do was bring the whole city. And the only thing that they were able to lift off was the Bastion of Takesis. So then that brings us to chapter 7, the last chapter of the adventure. And in chapter 7, you start out in the Northern Waste still. You're making basically run to Calaman to prepare them for the city that's coming. So here's another place where it's like, I'm thinking, okay, what's a party really going to do? Are they going to want to just, we're going to run to the city and prepare it for the assault of the city, of the Flying Citadel? Or they want to just go into the Citadel right now and take care of it?
I was dying to go into the Citadel and take it down.
Yeah.
And then we're doing all this stuff in the city, preparing it. And it just felt a little frustrating, that aspect.
Yeah, that was definitely a point that I thought, most parties, if there wasn't Darrett trying to convince them to go warn the city, and I got the ships all ready. If you hurry, you can be there in a day. Type of stuff happening. If the party was left to their own devices, they wouldn't go warn the city. They'd just go right into the Flying Citadel. But the Flying Citadel had Dragonels all around it, transporting army troops up to it, and you had no way to get up to it unless you could all fly, which maybe you could have pulled off. So it would have been a tough thing to go after. So I mean, in the end, I think the right choice is to go to the city and prepare it, or go find a way to fly so you can get up to the Citadel.
Which doesn't seem that unusual.
Yeah.
Is that too much to ask? What were we, 8th level, 10th level?
Yeah, 10th level by that time. So you get back to the city, and it's basically, prepare the city for the attack that's coming, and then thwart the attack long enough. Early on, Darrett comes with Clystrand, an NPC from earlier, who was, just enraptured by dragons and wanted to know everything about dragons, and was the one that led you guys to the Dragonel Waste. He was going to help feed the dragons there, and he brings a flight of Dragonels. And so you guys have a way now to get up there. Or he says he's going to bring. He brings one with Darrett and says he's going to go get more. So you got to hold off the Dragon Army forces for him to go get more. And that's where I had the attack of Soth came during that point, riding on Karavarix. And the city, here's the map of the gate again. And again, you can do the thing where, during the night it gets worse. The next day, it's all burned out. And then the party's going to go and get Darrett, who lands behind enemy lines. The party uses the Dome Flinger to fly over the enemy lines, land there, get Darrett, who's being attacked by red dragons, at the time small red dragons. That was a tough fight. I didn't realize how bad 4 small red dragons could be. But they can be pretty vicious. 4 breath weapons is a lot.
Absolutely.
So you had that fight. You get Clystrand, you get the Dragonels. Now you fly the Dragonels up to the city to go take the city out. Oh, and while you're in the village or the city Calaman, you're having these various city encounters where you're seeing them preparing for the fight. Let me see here. Night report gates. Don't recall where I put this. But anyway, one of the encounters is, find it because it was a good one. I'll find it here and share this. So we're going to go to chapter 7. Return to Calaman, Day of Dread. Here's Return of Calaman. Quiet time, dread in the streets. And we have this, an old man with a pointed green hat sits on a bench, so Fizban / Paladine, telling a group of children a story of the heroic knight Huma Dragonbane. And there I had him share with Benin that he had like visions for Benin. I forget exactly how I worded it. That the Dragonlance would quench the cataclysmic flames. So the party can find out about that. There's a couple other places that they could find out that the Dragonlance can quench the cataclysmic flames that are powering the city. So then they go up to the city, the flying citadel that is, and there's kind of like a little dungeon crawl up there where you come in through the bottom, through these crypts that are crypts left over from when the Astarians ruled the city. There's a death god statue there. You can talk to a priest of the death god there, and he's kind of unhappy with the dragon army, what they've done, taken over his temple. And then you can come up a higher level where there's this actual shrine to Takesis, and you can find a treasure vault there, which the priest will tell you about after you've defeated the Draconians, which he did. And you can find an ancient shrine there, which is like, this is a pretty neat one. It's like this primordial altar to Takesis that the party can come across. And if you touch it, you have a vision, but you also release some undead. And the vision gives you the Dragon Queen's will. You see the armies of the Dragon Queen marching across Ansalon, but you get some resistance to her powers from that. And then finally you make it up to the upper level. And the party comes out here, and really the main source of what they're going to stop is right there. So it's like, huh. And the map, unfortunately, doesn't draw it very well. And there's huge gaps shown on the map. So I just made myself a note to make sure I realize that that wall's blocking and the party can't walk through it. But it's not blocking all the way. The party can smash it down if they want. So when the party comes into that long hallway there are some gaps on the east wall where they can see light shining through. And they can see the cataclysmic flames there. So if they can pass wall or, just knock it down with 60 hit points worth of damage, they can get through and into the cataclysmic flame. Now, before they had done that, they, of course, have Caradoc appears again, inhabiting another Calamanian soldier. And Caradoc has decided he's going to try and take over Soth's position. And he wants the party to help him, but unfortunately for Caradoc, he's not a spellcaster, so when it comes time to fly the citadel, he can't fly it. But it never got to that, because the party didn't trust Caradoc at all, not as far as they could throw him, again, after he had massacred the city council. I don't know what party would. But if you continue all the way around the bastion, you come to some skeletal knights here guarding another shrine to another of the evil gods. And then finally you come to Lord Soth sitting in the chair that's flying the citadel. But you don't have to face him. You just have to go and quench that Dragonlance in these flames, and the citadel is going to come down. And the party, it felt like you guys were so focused on, we got to kill Soth, that you weren't thinking about quenching the fires at all. Is that what you were thinking when you were here at this point? It's like, how do we kill Soth? Or how do we bring this down?
I was definitely focused on bringing it down.
Yeah, I was too.
Okay.
Now, with that being said, because of the way I felt like I felt like a confrontation with Soth was inevitable. So to me, in my mind, confronting Soth and bringing it down were linked. You couldn't do one without the other.
Got it.
And again, it's because I felt like they had foreshadowed that Soth was going to be the final confrontation of the adventure. So that's just kind of, I don't think I was prioritizing one over the other. I think in my mind, they were just both linked.
Yeah. So the party eventually decides, okay, we're going to make a distraction, try and distract Soth, and Soth's lieutenant, who's here as well, Western Kern. And then we're going to quench the Dragonlance, the fires with the Dragonlance, and they went for it. Now, as written, the Dragonlance appears to quench the fires just immediately. And I made it last a full round to do that, and if I ran this again, I might make it last like 2 rounds. Just to give a little bit more danger. It probably also depends on how well the party can take care of Western Kern, because that is a very vicious opponent who is normally there guarding the flame. But yeah, this party I think could have definitely gone 2 rounds. Would have made the kind of battle with Soth a little bit more climactic, because 1 round he can't do much to you. In 2 rounds he could start dropping people, or maybe if you got lucky you could start dropping him. And then as soon as the thing starts to crash, Soth is swallowed up in the crevasses that open up in the bastion as Takhisis punishes him for his failure and pulls him down into destruction. I mean, temporary destruction, of course, for Soth. So that's what happens to Soth, and it's just that fast. It's over for him. Then the party's going to get off this falling island. They face Karavarix on the way out, but I didn't really want to have that full dragon fight. And Mooncatch was friends with Karavarix, so that opportunity helped get the party through that encounter quickly. And then they land outside of Kalaman, and they face the Dragon High Master on the battlefield there with, that picture basically is what happened. And that was a pretty good fight. That was a tough fight.
Probably
you
would
guys
have
ended up driving the dragon away.
Yeah, it probably would have been tougher without the mass suggestion.
Yeah, given that the dragon was at 72 hit points left and Kinsaldi was still at 133 and still had legendary resistances on the dragon, 2 of them. So yeah, it could have been pretty bad. But then that is, the final climactic battle. And then you have the post-battle scene where you have the aftermath, Kinsaldi defeated or driven away, heroes welcome back in Kalaman. And here you clean up the city, so I just had everyone take turns on what they're doing in the city. And then had everyone take turns on what they're going to do after. And then shared what Clystrand and Darrett and Marshall Vendry and Raven and Wagner's villagers and Rukeldust and Than were all doing. So that's kind of nice to tie up how the NPCs were doing and what the heroes were going to do next. And then finally, the last mysterious note from one Dragon High Lord Kidiara. And that was the end. So what do you guys think of the last chapter?
Overall, a lot of engaging stuff with the flying fortress and the senses-shattering battles. It seemed a little out of order. It felt like the flying fortress would have been the best thing to finish with, but that's a quibble.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, I agree. Like I said, the best way I could think of it is the fight with Kinsaldi was a post-credit scene. I mean, it was...
Yeah.
But we left out the best character of the entire adventure.
Who was?
Lori Wanwillow, the Kinder vampire.
Yeah.
Those vampires had me a little puzzled. What were they doing there? I guess it's because it's an ancient ruin, but...
So, Lori, let's see. Yeah, what were they doing there? So must not have described them well enough. So this vampire that you first run into is actually the priest that was here when the city crashed. So he is an Astarian priest that turned into a vampire. Lori is a curious Kender who wandered into the ruins sometime later. Got turned into a vampire by the Astarian priest, and it became so insufferable in her talking to him that he interred her in this area back here. Which I think, per the lore of the adventures, the Draconians unearthed somehow or it was unearthed when the place rose up into the sky. So then Lori, finally released from her decades-long imprisonment, she only came like 70 years before or something like that. She starts, reconnoitering and finding.
No, it was 200 years ago.
200 years, okay. She starts finding out what's going on. Yeah, so Lori was not there originally, but the priest. Vampire was there from the beginning and did not like Lori, couldn't stand her. Don't know why.
Yeah, she had no idea why. That was the great thing. She has no idea why. And also, another little fun Easter egg was the ventriloquist dummy with the sharp widow's peak and red satin cape that she had in her possession.
Was that Strahd? Is that?
Oh yeah, that's definitely Strahd, right?
Yeah, maybe from what Binsky's. What's the name of that toy?
Blinkskis.
Blinksky.
Or Blink, something like that.
Yeah, if there's no Blinksky, it's no fun.
Yeah, yeah.
I bet that's what that was. Anyone else pick up any other Easter eggs in there? I'm trying to think of what other ones Chris might have slipped in that I can't think of. I think that was the main one.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course Kitty Yara at the end. That was the only nod to any. It's interesting because they could have put in any of the original heroes in here, right? Because
Hmm.
this is half a year before, when the heroes are all spread across the world, um, exploring, trying to find out what's going on, right?
Hmm.
Now, um, Raceland and Caravan, they were probably busy to the south.
Well, they had a series of novels that was what they were up to.
Oh, they did? Okay.
Yeah.
So did any of them ever get up around Calaman?
So I'm going off memory. The only one I could remember of them is because it was just so crazy was the one that starred Sturm and Kitiara. They I can't remember how, but they got stuck on a gnome, what was essentially a gnome rocket ship, and wound up on the Lunatari moon, and we're going around like, and that was not the adventure. Took place on Lunatari until they could get back to Kryn, and it was just bananas. So that's the only one I can remember. But this, and then Kitiara like left, and then you knew that she went and joined the Dragon armies. So I mean, I presumably because of the timing, that I think they could have. I mean, again, they shoehorned in some. I mean, Dalamar was shoehorned in, and which is fine. It was very much a like I said, fan service. And in all fairness, so the note at the end from Kitiara was the same, right? I mean, there was no narrative point to it. It was just fun to be able, so people would be like, "Oh, Kitiara, I recognize that name."
Right.
But
They might have been wary about introducing some of the book heroes as that would potentially overshadow the player characters. What are we doing here when this?
Yeah, I really liked how this was your character's adventure. It
Yep.
wasn't the adventure of the heroes of the lands. It was your guys' adventure, and it had lots of cool stuff. It had the flying city, it had the Dragonlance. You know, here's one other little, not Easter egg, but something if you're running it to watch out for. So, in the Dragon Army route, when you're fighting the Dragon High Master Kinsaldi, it takes place on this Clash of Fallen Flames area, and in each of these like battle things, they have random encounters that can happen, and they have this random encounter here, which you could easily not roll, which has a random player character notices the clouds above the battlefield momentarily look like a five-headed dragon, which I said I think I remember art like that. So if you look back in chapter War Comes to Kryn, and there's this picture right here. That is that picture.
Oh yeah.
And so I said, oh, well, that's got to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Why would you have that as a random thing happening?
Yeah.
That probably doesn't happen in the adventure if you have that cool of art. So I made sure that happened.
That seems like something you'd notice.
Yeah, I
gotta
definitely
say.
move that up. Move that up to just be an automatic thing that happens in that encounter if you're running it.
Agreed.
Yeah, I wonder how many other little things are like in the random encounters. You have in chapter 3, there's the battle at High Hill, the betrayal at High Hill, which has one of these things. And I don't think nothing specifically happens there. And you also have the various things that happen, like when you meet Fizban, for example, in chapter 6. That's just a random thing on a table. So definitely look through all those random tables if you're going to DM it, and make sure that you catch anything that you definitely want to have happen.
Okay, Tom, here's a question for you. Were there parts of this adventure you were looking at and maybe that was giving you heartburn as a DM, thinking that that's going to be problematic, or parts that you were excited about coming up to in the adventure when you were running?
It was pretty straightforward. Chapter 5 was tough because I over-prepped stuff. And so over-prepping with a complete sandbox is often a lot of work. But once you're done, you're done. And
Yeah.
then the hard part is sitting back and let the players explore it all. That was 4 sessions, and it's like, yeah, but I'm done, and I want to move on to the next part as the DM.
Yeah.
I've seen all these 4 sessions, so that might have been the hardest part of it. Balancing the encounters was a little tough because some of it was underbalanced. Some of the dragons were like young dragons, like the red was young, the blue you fought was young, which will go down in like a round or 2 rounds for the party
Yes.
fighting them. But then you jump up to adult, and it's like, ooh, this breath weapon's going to do a lot of damage.
Mm-hmm.
And that's always so hard to pull the trigger as a DM on something that'll do a lot of damage. But I feel like as a player, when you survive that, it's like, holy cow, look what we just survived. So it feels a little more rewarding as a player sometimes, I think.
Agreed.
What else was there? That, you know, it was just a lot of fun. The whole adventure felt very much like Dragonlance,
Mm-hmm.
but not repeating Dragonlance, which I thought was great. There was definitely they did their research. It didn't feel like they really went too far afield on any lore. They got most of it right. It felt like to me.
Well, and the funny thing about Dragonlance, of course, is that you don't really have to worry too much about it because they have that now I'm blanking on the name of it, but the time hopping device that they're just constantly retconning, as they go. It's since the brand new trilogy that the first book came out last August, heavily involves somebody going back in time and monkeying around with the past.
Right.
Arguably, you could just say, well, the reason it's different from the original trilogy is because of that. This is a new timeline.
Yep, definitely. So I want to also do a little quick shout out to another parallel campaign happening. So that is the Adventure League is doing a parallel Dragonlance campaign called Vault of the Undying. And I think it's going to be like levels 1 through 10 or 11, I think. And Dragons of Divinity is out now in Dungeon Masters Guild. That's a fun starting adventure. Josh,
I've played all of them. I've played all of them so far. Me
Yeah.
and my oldest have been playing them on the virtual weekends, and I think that's another one where it is paralleling what's going on, and it feels so far it's just been a lot of fun. Very Dragonlance, but again, it's also taking place in Solamnia, during the invasion. But those adventures so far have been a lot of fun as well.
Yeah, I ran the first one. I ran both the first and second one, and they were both really cool. And Dwarven DM's doing this. John Christian. Sorry, John, if I got that wrong. Definitely really devoted to the setting. Really knows the lore of the setting, and really enthusiastic for the setting. So when you have that kind of, and Alan Patrick also, when you have that kind of enthusiasm, you're going to get a good product, I think. So I'm looking forward to the rest of that series. That's something I might run someday as well. And there's going to be new products probably that'll come out that'll be after this adventure, because this adventure ends with the characters 11th level or 12th level. And they can go right into the War of the Lance next, because it's like the summer of 351 and the fall of 351, the Heroes of the Lance start.
That would be amazing if they actually did do a sequel, if you will, a sequel adventure or a sequel campaign where you could continue on that.
It's tough. How would they marry it into the climax where you actually defeat Takesis? You couldn't really do it, right? Because the Heroes of the Lance do that part.
Yeah. That's true, but I think that you could always, and again, this adventure is just a really good example of there being other stuff going on in the world that, you need heroes to stop. Even if it's not exactly what the Heroes of the Lance did, you can still have a really compelling adventure that doesn't overshadow that.
Yeah. So that one ended in complete victory for the party. We just finished Spelljammer, which ended in complete capture of the party. We'll see if I do. I'm picturing like a Guardians of the Galaxy prison escape for the next part of that one someday, if you ever want to revisit it. Take you guys out of there and save your world. But then
that might be fun.
Yeah. I could see like the Treant ripping apart the jail roof, pulling the jail roof apart, and you guys getting out of there, something like that. That'd be a fun start of an adventure. And then we're doing some Shadow Dark here next week. That's going to be cool. Can't wait to do that. And then waiting for the next campaigns, the next big 5e campaigns. And that's it. Anything else, guys?
No, this was one of my favorites. I really
right.
enjoyed it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a really good one.
Good one.